Okay, I get to welcome a lovely woman here, a great feminist and friend, Elizabeth Renzetti, who is a columnist for the Globe and Mail. And you can see every week you can see one of her columns, which are usually either very funny or tragic. Yeah, I never know which it's going to be. But at any rate, she has a new book out, which apparently has just hit the bestseller list. It's called Shrewd, Shrewed. Yes. And it's obviously a funny reference to shrewish, the stereotype of women, bossy women as shrews. So at any rate, it's going to be fun to hear what she has to say, not about feminism particularly, I guess, tonight, but about another avocation or vocation of hers, rather, because as a journalist, she has to give a lot of thought to whether or not the news that is being printed is true or fake. And we have a whole industry surrounding the notion of fake news. So I think Elizabeth gave me a little trouble when we met last time, when she thought I wasn't doing due diligence in trying to check out the names of the credentials and the authority of people who were publishing things on places like Facebook. And I had to admit that I don't check it out, and I should. So I stand corrected and am reproached.
My shrewish behavior.
Shrewish behavior. Exactly. Okay, well, I'm glad we have a real shrew here with us tonight. So here's Elizabeth Renzetti.
Thank you, Matt. Hi, guys. Thanks for coming out tonight. I really appreciate it. Tell me if you can't hear me. Actually, I'm going to just put this up here. That'll be easier. So, yeah. I think the format we're going to take is I will talk a little bit about the subject, and then we're going to open up the platform to questions at the end. I will not keep you too long because, as a famous literary impresario, Greg Gatenby used to say, he used to keep his readings to 20 minutes, no matter how famous the author was, saying, the brain cannot absorb, but the ass cannot endure. It's been my motto ever since. Okay, so when Meta and I had first talked about this, I think we talked about it, the subtitle was something like Faux Real, and then how fake news undermines democracy. But I feel like we're so past that now. I feel like we all know. We've just had such a deluge of information about kind of the corrosive effects of fake news that I will indeed talk about that a little bit, but sort of saving more time at the end to look at what some of the various fixes are, steps ahead, the ways that both news outlets and social media platforms are trying to stem this problem, because it is, I think we can agree, it's a pretty large problem. Okay, this is a slide from London after the terrorist attack, just about this time last year, actually, the terrorist attack on Westminster Bridge, which killed 5 people. I know, it's funny, isn't it? It's so funny that I put it in my column. Which was about why we disproportionately cover terrorist attacks that happen in the West and not ones that happen in the rest of the world, where they wreak much more damage and are much more common. So I was writing a column about that as somebody who lived in London for 8 years. And I thought, I used to pass these signs every day getting on the tube. Normally they said things like, person under train, honest to God, they would say person under train. Or, like no service at Whitechapel or something. But this one, very funny. Sometimes the tube, the guys and the women who work in the tube will put inspirational things on the signs as you walk into the tube. So I quoted this one in my column, and I get home and there's a message on my phone from Hank van de Vondervoort, who's one of the editors at the paper, saying, that's not real. That sign is not real. Yeah, I know. And I was like, oh shit. Because I swear, so sorry. There's gonna be more swearing as the evening goes on. And I know, like, I think of myself as such a careful journalist. I really do. I fact check sources. I double check, try to double check against original documents. And, I talk to people when I feel like there's something I don't understand. So I felt like I was bamboozled, and it really made me irate. So what we did in this case was the paper was about to go to press, so we just changed it to, I had written something like, a tube sign went viral, and we just changed it to a fake tube sign went viral. So this is actually created using something called tube sign generator, in which you can all go on you can get this app very easily. You can create your own tube signs that say things and post them everywhere and fool journalists like me. So I should say a little bit about myself, which is that I've been a journalist since I was 21, which is many years ago now. So I've spent the majority of that time at the Globe and Mail, but also worked as a freelance writer. And at the Globe, I've been a reporter, a columnist, an editor, a manager. So I have a lot of experience in sort of how we create, choose, digest, edit, think about the news. And I have to say the past couple of years have been a real astonishing wake-up call for everybody, really, I think, in the industry, not just everybody in the industry, but everybody who is interested in news. So news, yes, but this, what we call fake news, is not really new, if you think about it. For example, the moon colony of 1835. Did you know there was a colony on the moon? Yes, there was, with these flying bat people and bipedal beavers as well, and unicorns. And this colony on the moon was spotted in 1835 by an astronomer, an actual astronomer, using a very, very, very large telescope, who saw for the first time that there was a colony on the moon. And like readers of the New York Sun in 1835 ate this up. They really enjoyed the story about the moon colony. And it went on for weeks and weeks and weeks before somebody finally, and I'm not sure who, finally, pulled back the curtain and said, not actually a colony on the moon. But people did enjoy it while it went on. Less pleasant, let's just say, was 150 years later. Famous story of the Hitler Diaries, published in Stern in Germany, in Newsweek, and in the Sunday Telegraph. There were concerns raised about the veracity of these diaries before they were published, but they were such a gold mine. They were, Rupert Murdoch apparently said something like, I'm going to sell a lot of papers, but in an Australian accent, he said it. And when it appeared in the Sunday Telegraph, the Sunday Times, which is still Rupert Murdoch's paper, it's still a famous British paper, one of the great papers of record. They sold 60,000 more copies of the Sunday Times the day they published this. And it was a huge hoax, and it was an embarrassment. And one of the Stern journalists went to jail. The forger went to jail. And it damaged the reputations of those three outlets, but not so much. Newsweek only recently, I think, folded or went through some strange incarnation. And I believe Stern is still around, and I know for sure Sunday Times is still around. Or is this fake news? Does anybody remember this story? Poor Chris Hadfield coming home through a 1.37 million. Yeah, so Rogers, because he used so much data in space, downloading his videos and uploading his videos, and that he had this huge cell phone bill when he came home. Of course, this isn't true. This is from the Beaverton. Yeah, this is from the Beaverton website, which is as I'm sure know, a satirical website and television show. But the funny thing about this is that Luke Gordon Field, who's the Beaverton kind of head writer, told me this was picked up all over the world as an actual story and republished as an actual story, and B, he gets asked about it all the time. So to this day, people say, why did that Canadian company do that to that poor astronaut? Why did they give him that huge bill? Chris Hadfield did not actually get $1.37 million. Even though he probably has more data than that, though. Yes. So is that fake news? Kind of getting a bit closer to it here, I would say. I don't know if you guys remember this story from late last year. It had huge traction in Quebec because it was a story from a local TV network saying that this mosque under construction in Montreal had instructed the contractors and their electrical subcontractors to not allow women to work on site on Fridays. So of course it blew up. It got talked about in the legislature in Quebec City. It got talked about all over, talk radio. How could we be making these religious accommodations? Except it's not true. So as it turned out, it wasn't true at all. The TV station retracted the story, and they couldn't find any evidence that the mosque had ever done anything like that. It asked for women not to be on site on Fridays. And I think probably, as in many of these cases, people remember the story and don't remember the correction. This is my feeling. This is how our extremely faulty psychology works. I don't know if there are any psychologists in the room, but we'll get to that. I mean, our own personal biases and bad decision-making processes have a lot to do with all of this. So in September 2017, Dictionary.com added this definition, which you can all read, to their dictionary. The year before, the word of the year or the phrase of the year in Oxford dictionaries was post-truth. So you see the theme here. So this to me gets closer to the nub of it. It's not disputed. It's not about disputed opinion, fake news. It's not about satire. It's not about a legitimate mistake that's been made by somebody, which is quickly corrected. But it is about, I think, the deliberate spread of misinformation for ideology or malice or profit. All of these things come into it. So this gets a little bit closer to it, I think. This is actually really what we're talking about, I think. So when a young man went on a killing spree at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, as I'm sure we all know at this point, the students became incredible advocates for themselves and for the reform of gun laws in America. And what happened almost immediately was quite extraordinary, was that they became the victims of hoaxes and conspiracies. People said that they were what are called crisis actors. Crisis actors are apparently people hired for money by lobbyists or the government to stage these so-called false flag operations to drive a particular political agenda. So in this case, it would have been like maybe gun reform lobby staged the whole thing and hired these young people to be actors. And to this day, like just yesterday, it's still filled. Like the internet is still filled with this stuff about how these are not actual high school students. They're crisis actors. And the best response I heard was from one of these kids who said he was being interviewed, and I think it was Wolf Blitzer said, are you actually a crisis actor? And the kid said, if you saw me in the school production of Fiddler on the Roof, you would know what a bad actor I am. And so, no, I am no crisis actor, crisis or otherwise. So this is, this is insidious. It's deceitful, and it's everywhere, really, or it sort of was everywhere until, no, it's still everywhere. The difference is that I would say in the past, like 4 or 5 months, we've started to realize, as news has come out about especially how the American presidential election was influenced by a really complicated stew of factors, I would say having a lot to do with racism and misogyny, but also with influences that played to those kind of baser instincts, and which were spread on social media, because this is where the vast majority of people now receive their information. I feel like we're a self-selecting audience, so we're probably an audience that maybe reads the Globe, listens to the CBC, you probably read The Economist or something, or The Walrus. So I feel that okay, maybe not Meta, because she's reading things on Facebook. No, I'm just joking. That is one of the smartest and most accomplished people I know. But it is interesting that when we had that talk, Meta and I was saying, like, are you checking the provenance of these things that, we're reading? And I kind of felt like if Meta was like so smart and so accomplished and so educated, is sort of not feeling like he necessarily has to every time, then what does that say for everybody else, right? What does that say for people who are not as savvy or media literate? Anyway, so there we are. So we've gotten to the point where people are saying don't even use fake news anymore. This is Margaret Sullivan. She's the really terrific media columnist for the Washington Post. And I kind of agree with her now. Like, the term has become so debased that, when Donald Trump uses it to talk about something he's seen on CNN that he doesn't like, it's fake news, even though it's, completely accurate. We've really fallen down a wormhole where the phrase has ceased to have any meaning. So as she says, call a lie, call a hoax a hoax. We have a lot of problems in journalism calling a lie, because a lie, saying something is a lie implies that there's intent. There's an intent to mislead, right? And then it becomes a kind of a sticky, did this person actually? Yeah, and then you're into defamation and libel law, and it can become very tricky. So it's easier just to say they misled, or they, did not speak entirely truthfully, or all these other wishy-washy euphemisms we use now. So she also quotes Glenn Kessler, who's the Washington Post chief fact checker, who says, people seem to confuse reporting mistakes by established news organizations with obviously fraudulent news produced by Macedonian teenagers. So the Macedonian teenagers he's talking about, I'm sure you remember, are the ones who made just a ton of money off the last American election by essentially writing bullshit that they knew would be popular, like tasty bullshit for people, that would be spread around a lot, get lots of clicks, would attract lots of ad revenue. And it's not just Macedonian teenagers. There were all these people who were making a lot of money creating completely fraudulent websites filled with this kind of toxic cotton candy, which was extremely popular. My God, what have we done? I love quoting the talking head, so there you go. So these are some of the factors I think have, and we can talk about if you guys think there are other factors, but I think these are major factors in why we're seeing the spread of fake news. People just don't trust institutions the way they used to. This is a good thing in many ways. It's a not very good thing in other ways, right? If you don't trust authoritative news sources, if you don't trust the government, to speak frankly, if you don't trust business, if you don't trust the judiciary, if you don't trust, educators, then you end up on quicksand. I personally, of course, is a bit self-serving, but I believe that the weakening of traditional media has had a lot to do with this, and that is not, cannot say this enough, it's not a crisis of readers. We have as many readers, if not more, as we did before. It's a crisis in advertising. Newspapers, we've always done a bad job about communicating about how newspapers actually work, and for the longest time, newspapers thrived on advertising, not on subscriptions. In fact, it often cost newspapers to have subscribers because it was expensive to get the paper out to them. Then when advertising started to fall and started to drift off to Google and to Facebook, papers became better about finding subscribers, monetizing those subscribers. But I mean, look at this, 225 weekly, 27 daily papers closed in 7 years in Canada. And that was as of the end of maybe the middle of 2017 that was, so more have closed since. And a third of journalism jobs. The rise of social media, right? Which just becomes this lovely frictionless place for you no longer have to clip out the Dear Abby column, put it in an envelope, find a stamp, mail it to your daughter. Now it's just like, oh, look at this meme that says that, Hillary Clinton is running a pedophile ring out of a pizzeria in Washington, D.C., because of course she is. I'm just going to send that along and poof, there it goes. Which is tied, of course, to the next point, which is polarization. I've read a lot of different things by different political scientists about the effect of polarization on this, and I don't think it's definitive. So I think it probably has some effect, the fact that we are maybe a bit more, especially in the States, less so in Canada, but especially in the States. And in Britain, around the Brexit vote, that's been extremely polarizing for people, for Leavers and Remainers. And one of the last factors, I would say, is profit. People can make a ton of money starting up fake websites and spreading fake news. It costs nothing. You need no overhead. Some of the stories are extraordinary when you read about these guys, and they who essentially, some start out as satirists and some start out saying, oh, I just wanted to do it to prove how dumb people are, ha ha ha. And then they started making money and realized, and they became little farms of fake news, and realized how easy it is to make money off fooling the public. Who was it? Was that P.T. Barnum who said that? Yes. Yeah, nobody ever went broke underestimating the... Okay, so Craig Silverman, who's Canadian, is kind of, in many ways, the godfather of this. Maybe he's the typhoid Mary, because he started, no, that's a bad analogy, because if he were the typhoid Mary, he'd be the one spreading the... So he's the one actually giving the inoculations. He's like the doctor in this scenario. He's a Canadian journalist, works at BuzzFeed now, and he's done a lot of groundbreaking work over the past few years on fake news and the spread of fake news. So I find this astonishing, and yet I don't. This is what he wrote in just after the election, so sort of mid to end of November 2016. In the final 3 months of the US presidential campaign, the top performing fake election news stories on Facebook generated more engagement than the top stories from the major news outlets, such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, Huffington Post, NBC News, and others. So during those 3 critical months, 20 top performing false election stories from hoax sites and hyper-partisan blogs generated 8.7 million shares. And the top 20 stories from legitimate news sources were shared or commented upon 7.3 million times. So far outpaced by fake news stories. And the interesting thing is that for most of the election, actually legitimate news stories were kind of tracking above false news stories. And then something happened about 3 months before, and maybe it was the fact that people realized they could monetize fake news and inflammatory content, and then it just went. But again, like the Pogo cartoon says, we have met the enemy, and we know who the enemy is. It's our own bad judgment, laziness, hyper-partisan nature, cliquiness, need to be in groups and like-minded people. We like, as this study, which is from just this month actually, reveals, we like sharing fake news. It travels. So this study is interesting because it is from MIT. So these researchers are from MIT. The study was published in Science just a couple of weeks ago. And the interesting thing about this is they used Twitter data, and Twitter gave them their data, which is, I have to say, like, good on you, Twitter. Like, I have lots of problems with Twitter, but good for them, because Facebook is, as we know, like a miser with its data and does not like to share it at all, which is partly why we're in the pickle we're in now. But Twitter was like, okay, no, come in, we open the doors, here you go. And these researchers from MIT found that fake news stories were 70% more likely to be retweeted than true stories. It took true stories 6 times longer to reach people. And true stories were rarely shared beyond 1,000 people. But the most popular fake news was shared by about 100,000 people. And the reason, they studied 126,000 rumors or false messages on Twitter to discover this over the period of 11 years. And the most common subject matter was politics, but there was also, people were talking about all kinds of things, business, conspiracy theories, science, all manner of things, celebrity. And there's a great quote from one of the researchers who said, the interesting thing here, that novelty, they determined, was the main reason why fake news spread so quickly and so well. False news is more novel, Professor Sinan Aral said, more novel, and people are more likely to share novel information. So just by sheer dint of it being fake and interesting, people are more likely to pass it on. This is something I find fascinating as a journalist, because we have to be so careful. Like after the Boston bombings, I don't know if you remember, a guy was misidentified as the bomber, and it was a really terrible moment, I think, in journalistic modern history. This happened again in I'm going to forget the name of the city, where there was recently a shooter who killed like a few cops. It was in the States, it was in the South somewhere. And everybody was watching it unfold on CNN, and this guy got identified in real time as the probable shooter. He walked into a hotel and he was carrying a gun. And they had his picture up for like probably 20 minutes or half an hour until the police said, please take that picture down. That is not a suspect. That is just somebody who was in the crowd. And I keep thinking, like, that poor guy afterward, what's happened to him. But it's a weird human instinct to want to know before anybody else does and to share that information, even if it's wrong. It's a bit terrifying. So why is this a problem? I think we know why it's a problem, but we'll just go through it. I think this quote is fascinating. This is actually My husband, Doug Saunders, who also writes for the Globe and Mail, wrote a piece about Facebook and why it's a threat to democracy. I also wrote a piece a few weeks ago saying the exact same thing. And because he's a foreign correspondent, he travels a lot and he talks to a lot of decision makers. And this is a quote. He says, over the last few months, I've had conversations with political decision makers and parties that have governed Canada, Sweden, Belgium, and Germany. And he's asked them what scares you. And what they say is, we're losing touch with huge numbers of voters who are getting all their news and information from posts and videos. We just can't reach those people anymore. They're abandoning normal politics. I don't know, that scares me. It scares you. Not quite as much as the renewed nuclear arms race, but close. Okay, I highly recommend you guys read this if you have time. It's from University of British Columbia. It came out about 6 weeks ago. I thought it was fascinating.
Read the title because it's too faint.
Okay, it says digital threats to democratic elections, how foreign actors use digital techniques to undermine democracy. So essentially what it's saying is what we sort of know, I guess, already, is that, the American election was not a one-off. And if you think that, you're crazy. It's been going on for years. It will continue to go on. And what they mean by foreign actors is not just states, but also or cyber hackers in the employ of states, but also just anybody who wants to disrupt democratic process. And they don't just mean elections either, they mean the process of democracy. So that is all of us agreeing on a common set of goals that we are going to work towards. Even the idea that there is a common set of goals or a common set of realities. And they go through and talk about the various ways that, fractures and divisions are being sown in populaces. And also how, again, our own, we're not as smart as we think we are about making decisions and about distinguishing things that are real from things that are false, and about how we are kind of herd animals in this way, and how that plays into various threats. Yeah?
As far as undermining democracy, I think they're a bit late.
Yeah, well, yeah, I agree. Do you want to have questions at the end? And we'll talk about the undermining of democracy at the end, which I'm sure is everybody will want to talk about. Okay, here we go, undermining democracy. So just going to look at a couple quick instances. This one about the Rohingya. So Facebook is huge in Burma. And is that me? Did I do that?
Supporting a fake
So I'm just going to read this quote from the Washington Post. An endless stream of provocative photos and cartoons claim that there's no ethnic cleansing against Burma's Muslim.
Sorry.
What is? Oh my God! What is that? I'm just gonna let Jasper deal with this. Yeah, really. It's the Russians. Anyway, so I'll just tell you. So a panel of UN experts came to the conclusion that there's a lot of lies being spread using Facebook, which is incredibly important in Burma, Myanmar, and what the lies that were being spread were that there was no ethnic cleansing going on against Rohingya people, and that those reports were all false. And if this is Facebook is your main source of information.
It works.
Oh, right. Thank you, Jasper. Thank you very much.
The slide isn't.
Oh, let's just go to the next one then.
Okay.
Want to?
Yep. You try that.
There. Ha ha ha.
Okay.
I'm going to go to Kenya now instead. Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. So, same thing in Kenya. There was an election last summer, disputed election, and in that disputed election were all kinds of strange things, like there would be doctored videos being shared, which purported to be from the BBC or CNN, but which were not. Lies about the main opposition candidate. And in a poll was taken just before the Kenyan election, 90% of Kenyans said they'd seen or been exposed to fake news. And so leading to, I wish you guys could see this, I'll read it to you though, leading to Facebook taking out this ad in newspapers in Kenya. So it says, tips for spotting fake news, be skeptical of headlines, look closely at the URL, investigate the source, watch for unusual formatting, consider the photos, inspect the dates, check the evidence, look at other reports. Is the story a joke? Some stories are intentionally false. Together we can limit the spread of false news. That's Rich from Facebook. Anyway, that's really interesting. And you know who worked for the Uhuru Kenyatta's campaign, the president of Kenya's campaign in this disputed election? Cambridge Analytica, which we've been hearing a lot about. And they in fact bragged about how in Kenya and in Nigeria, they could essentially, pull dirty tricks to confuse and fool the populace. Okay, and the next frontier is even scarier because do you know about deep fakes? No? Okay, so deep fakes are the next frontier. I can't play this video, unfortunately, but I encourage you to go home and just Google fake Obama. So there's two things going on here. One is that right now you can, using what I gather is fairly rudimentary software, pretty plausibly fake video or audio of someone. So you can put words into their mouths, and you can also manipulate their faces to make them look like they're saying something. This was a bit of research done by some scholars at the University of Washington, and what they did was they took Obama. So on the right, he's giving an actual speech about, I think it was about the Pulse shooting in Florida, and what they did was they created an entirely kind of fake Obama giving the same speech. So they put him in a different location, and they used just millions and millions and millions and millions of bits of video that existed of him. They said they worked with Obama because there was so much high definition video out there. And I swear, if you watch this, you would not know the one on the left is fake. So this is kind of terrifying, if you ask me, because pretty soon we're not going to know. It's one thing to look at a piece of text and be like, or a meme, and you're like, oh yeah, there's no way that's true. But if you see somebody talking or moving or in a location where they weren't before, how do you then dispute that, right? How do you even, yeah?
Could you just explain what retiming is?
So the retiming is, I think it's just what they were talking about is, without retiming, is his actual speech. So that's him speaking on the day, and so that's like the authentic video. So with retiming is they took that speech and using digital manipulation, made him say the speech in a completely different place. So they could have also made him, you could tell they're researchers, they're academics, so they clearly did not want him to be saying something, they didn't want to make something up, but they wanted to demonstrate it. So they did it by just having him in a different place, different clothing. And you can't really tell here, but it's in a different room. So on a different day. So they made this up essentially on the right using something he said. Okay, the way ahead. So what do we do? What do we do now? I have to say, for the longest time, nobody was doing anything. And now, like in the past couple of months, it's just a deluge. Everyone's trying everything. And there's this, in fact, our Karina Gould, who's who's our Minister of Democratic Institutions, said she recently went on a tour of Europe to find out what other governments are doing, and because, of course, Elections Canada is committed to shoring up our defenses before the next federal election, the Communications Security Establishment has said that there's a very high likelihood that our own election will be tampered with in some way. So Elections Canada is spending, I think, $10 million to try to prevent this in whatever ways they can. Anyway, Karina Gould, who's the Democratic Institutions Minister, said one thing after her tour of talking to European leaders, one thing I came away with was that everyone's trying to kind of wrap their heads around this issue and that nobody actually has a real answer to it, but everyone is trying to do different things. So that's where we're at. So I actually have no concrete answers. I can just tell you what some of the things that are being tried. In France, the last presidential election, as you probably know, there was an attempt made to hack it in terms of there was a data breach that happened. There was attempts made to spread falsehoods about Macron. And interestingly, like all kind of segments of French society came forward and like didn't spread the data from the data breach and kind of provided a bulwark against this this manipulation that was going on. So what France is doing now and what Germany is also doing is instituting laws to prevent this happening in the future. So for example, France is giving new powers to judges to restrict certain kinds of, if they spot free speech just around election time, they can clamp down on it. They're going to fine companies that are spreading bad information. Same thing in Germany. I think you can see what the problems are with this especially for North America. I mean, we already have such kind of a fraught relationship with the many principles around free speech that are foundational for us. Not saying they're not for France as well, but it would just be such a political hot potato to try to bring something like this in. So I'm not sure that is where we're going. Okay, so Facebook, all the big digital social media platforms are now wearing a hair shirt. A bit late, the horses left the stable. I know that's a mixed metaphor, so I'm sorry. But they're doing whatever they can, right? Or are they? I don't know. They're certainly saying they're doing whatever they can. So Facebook, in the past little while, has changed its algorithm. It's a very mysterious algorithm that they won't share with anyone to favor, so you'll see more friends and family news stuff in your news feed than from, like, say, traditional news sources. I'm not sure that's actually going to fix the problem, considering it's usually like your Uncle Charlie who sends you this stuff in the first place. They have launched a news integrity initiative to fund various journalistic projects, to fund fact-checking, to fund media literacy. And this is interesting to me. They tried to do this thing where they would put disputed flags on articles that were contentious or fake. And it backfired, apparently. It actually, and again, psychologists in the room probably will obviously know this, is sometimes the harder you hammer at somebody to change their opinion, the more they double down on their beliefs. I think it's called the backfire effect. So when they put these disputed flags on, people actually were like, it got their backs up. So now what they've done instead is, on some articles they'll have that show up in your newsfeed, they'll have a little tag that says related articles. And if you click on it, it might have a fact check, or it might have different articles from different sources around that one to give you a broader perspective. Okay, so Google's main problem, if you ask me, is YouTube, because YouTube is just a cesspool, and it's where young people get, it seems to me, being the mother of two young people, 90% of their information. Is this true? Okay, we have a thumbs up from an actual young person here. And as you probably know, YouTube's also mysterious algorithms drive you deeper and deeper and deeper into conspiracy, into it's essentially kind of like the drug analogy. They give you, when they suggest the videos for you on the right, they become harder and like more hardcore. So if you're watching conspiracy videos, the conspiracies become more hardcore. If you're watching, I don't know, something about, it could be anything. It feeds you more intense content. And Google has said it's going to try to fix this, but it has not offered up any good way of how it's going to fix this. It said, oh, maybe we could use Wikipedia fact checkers. That's a good idea. Because like Wikipedia fact checkers are unpaid. They are those people do it like they're volunteers. They do it out of the goodness of their heart. They don't have time to fact check a billion YouTube videos. Anyway, so what else? The Google News Initiative, like the Facebook News Initiative. I think they could have just gotten together and had one giant news initiative. But anyway, so they've got this thing called the Disinfo Lab, which again is working with big American universities as a way of checking material that is inauthentic. World Fact Checking Day is April 2nd. Everyone should know that. MediaWise is their program to teach media literacy to young people. And then subscribe with Google, because they know they've been siphoning off tons of money from legitimate news sources. I mean, Google and Facebook are the reason so many newspapers are having trouble. And so with subscribe with Google, what it is you can use your Google logon and subscribe to a newspaper. It just makes it a tiny bit more seamless. So media literacy is huge, I think. I think we don't spend enough time teaching our kids about it. My kids get a lot of stuff about bullying in their school, which is also extremely important. I agree that like every sort of play that gets put on is about bullying, and they really don't spend a lot of time talking about media literacy. So there are these programs out there which are devoted to teaching media literacy. But often it happens in high school or even in university. So for example, there's this course that's here that I mentioned, Calling Bullshit in the Age of Big Data at the University of Washington, which is taught by a data scientist and I think a philosopher. I think, anyway, it's one of those cross-disciplinary things.
But it's a university course, is that what you're saying?
It's a university course, and it just started, I think, 2 years ago or a year ago, and apparently it's extremely popular. All right. Okay, this is interesting to me, the fact-checking thing, because as I was mentioning before, fact-checking often does nothing because it's good for people who want their facts checked. It is not so good for people who are quite happy to spread BS in the first place. And something like the Pew Research Center had a thing saying something like 20% of people knowingly spread false news and disinformation and don't really care. So I think fact-checking is important for journalists and it's important for engaged citizens, but I'm not sure it's going to do a lot for the people who are who we really need to get at, the most hardcore, difficult cases. So the last thing I want to just show you there is Claimbuster versus Brooke Burrell, which is just fascinating to me. This was an article that was in Popular Science last week or so. And it really is like John Henry versus the steam drill. So Brooke Burrell is this very well-known fact checker. She's literally written a book called, I think, The Chicago Guide to Fact Checking. And Claimbuster is a new algorithm-driven fact-checking site. So she decided to test herself against it and see who could fact-check better and in what time. She took an article from InfoWars, so I use the word article loosely, because InfoWars is a conspiracy website, and it was an article about how polar ice was not declining. And she fed the text into this new fact-checking website called Claimbuster, and then she sat down and fact-checked it herself. And it took her 6 hours, and she phoned people, she consulted documents, she looked at scientific research, and Claimbuster took 11 minutes. but it didn't find and it found some things, but it didn't find the most sort of nuanced, claims escaped it because it's still in its very early stages, and language trips it up, especially language that's ambiguous, and it's very hard for it to make these sort of qualitative judgments that a human can make. So I tell you this to say that I think that human fact checkers are still the best. So we're almost at the end. I talked a little bit about the trust issue, and I think newspapers and news outlets in general need to, do better work of reclaiming public trust for sure. I think we maybe took it for granted for a long time. So the paper I work for, the Globe and Mail, is part of this trust project, along with The Economist, La Repubblica, the Washington Post, a bunch of other outlets, which is in the beginning stages of, it has a bunch of principles that we guaranteed to adhere to along the lines of transparency, letting you know more about journalists' background and the work they do, what the methods are, for example, of how we collect stories, who owns the particular news outlet, things like that. The Trust Initiative at the Toronto Star is really interesting. If you go to their website and you're interested in any of the big projects they've done, you can go, and it's really great. They have these long stories about like how we did it. This is what the reporters did. This is who they called. This is why they didn't do it. This is why they did this instead. They haven't asked me anything, where you can send the reporters questions and say, why did you do this and not that? So it just, I think, like opens up the doors for somebody asked Daniel Dale, who I'm sure you all followed him. He's the fantastic Washington correspondent for the Star, who is always fact checks Donald Trump. They said, how do you not go insane? He said, I actually find it really fun. Okay. I think this is so crucial. I think this is really critical. Local news has taken a huge hit in the past little while. So that's Emily Bell there, formerly of The Guardian, now of the Tau Center for Digital Journalism. And as she said in this panel, pay journalists. So, if we can get people to subscribe, we can have more local news. We can have more authoritative news. I'm just going to very quickly talk a little bit about some of the ways that local news can survive at these times. The subscription model is useful for, as I say, allnovascotia.com, which is completely, you go there if you want news about Nova Scotia, because the local papers are sometimes not very good, and it will, give you all you want for a flat fee every month. Same thing with Canada Land and Discourse Media, which is trying to do very hyper-local reporting on local issues. For the longest time, local newspapers were really good and served their communities and were profitable. And because they were profitable, they were bought up by big chains, stripped down to their assets, stripped down to the bare bones, and then they died. So what's happened in some places, like, as I say here, the North Renfrew Times in the Ottawa Valley, is the employees buy the paper back and from the owners, and they're like, okay, we can make this work. We can make this work. And the North Renfrew Times is like bustling now because they've gone out, they're getting ads from the local community. People do want local news. It's just that they've been deprived of it for a long time. And then there's the Great West End Phoenix, which is Dave Bedini's paper. Hyper, micro local reporting between like Spadina and maybe the Humber River, Bloor to the lake. So you read about, a guy who has a bakery here, or somebody's pet, or, somebody's interesting garden. And it's really great, I think. And it could be, I think Metro's terrific. I love the Metro papers. I think they're really, again, useful and do local reporting and take the place of local papers in a lot of cities. Okay, I think we are, so the last thing I was just going to say is that, as I said at the beginning, we're the enemy in all of this. We click, we believe what we want to believe, we believe what it behooves us to believe, and don't want to believe things that are a little bit uncomfortable, and we send things on because we think they're funny or because we think our friends are gonna like them or because we wanna be the first one who noticed something. So I don't know if it can fix us. I hope so, because it does seem pretty crucial. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Thank you.
Just a comment, Canada Land is on CIUT. I think it's on Fridays, so I usually listen to it. Some really good stuff that they talk about. Alternative media.
Yeah, and they operate on is it called Patreon or Patreon? I don't know how to pronounce it. Anyway, that you can give money to them monthly, and that supports the staff. And then they do these podcasts. And,
yeah. Fundraising and stuff.
Yeah. So yes. Yes.
Young people don't read newspapers. I think the future of newspapers is bleak. I live in a building where I'm the only one who subscribes to Globe and Mail.
Yeah.
The only person who subscribes to Globe and Mail is me.
Right.
And that's not uncommon. And when I walk in the street, there's only one person carrying a newspaper. I am. So it doesn't look good. And by the way, I don't think they read them online either.
They do. Yeah. There are a lot of subscribers who read online. Yeah.
No,
We do. Yeah.
Sorry, I meant young people.
Well, the interesting thing about that is young people have never read newspapers, really. Like, it's always been a thing that they've come to later in life. I remember when I was in journalism school here, not here, Ryerson, a million years ago, nobody subscribed to a newspaper. We barely read newspapers. It's traditionally been a thing that you, as you get older, come to and get your news from that way. But that said, I think newspapers have to do a much better job of attracting young readers.
When you mentioned the media are afraid to set out lies, say that these are lies.
Yeah.
The New York Times has had no trouble with that. They've spelled out lies, they've called Trump a liar, and they've spelled out the number of lies he's committed.
Yeah.
So they had no trouble saying it.
Well, they did for a long time. It's been very contentious at how they phrase certain things. They do sometimes, call it as lies, but sometimes it's, falsehood or whatever. But yes, I think there's been a realization lately that the public wants to know these things, wants to hear them.
When you made a comment about we're losing faith in institutions, remember? When you said, and one of the institutions is politicians.
Uh-huh.
Yet I.F. Stone used to tell us all politicians lie.
Right.
So it's questionable whether we should trust politicians necessarily.
It's not about trusting an individual politician or not. It's about trusting the system. It's about trusting the idea of the democratic system to represent your interests in an authentic way. That's what people are now questioning, and that's, I think, very frightening.
There's a famous quote about democracy. One of the dangers of democracy is, I'm sorry I'm talking so much.
It's okay. One more and we'll go to somebody else.
The dangers of democracy is allowing ordinary people to vote.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah.
You know what I mean?
I'd say don't allow millionaires to vote equally.
You end up with people like Trump.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's enough.
Yeah. Thank you, though, for those questions. Jasper, do you want to ask me something?
Yeah, I agree with him that basically the only thing that I ever rarely read in the newspaper is the automotive section.
Interesting. Yeah, you like the automotive section.
Yeah.
What do you think would make it better?
Content.
Okay, so like what kind of content?
Content more, directed to younger readers.
Yeah.
Because we're not very interested in politics as a 14-year-old.
Right.
Because it doesn't really affect us greatly. We don't know how it affects us.
Yeah.
So I think something that would affect us directly would be more attractive to younger readers.
So maybe social issues and things like that. Yeah. That's a good point. I'll take that back to the newsroom with me. Thank you. Yes.
When you say that people have lost faith in the democratic system, I think we have to recognize that there are many good reasons for losing faith in the democratic system, and we can't have this debate about false news without actually scrutinizing quite carefully what we call the democratic system, but which has pretty rigorously excluded vast numbers of people from having anything to say at all about the kind of country that they live in.
I agree 100%. But I would say also we need newspapers to do that and to point out where politics are underserving the most marginalized people.
But newspapers don't do that.
I would argue that we do. I mean, I would argue that the investigations at the Toronto Star, for example, or the Globe into, any number of things, do bring those things to light. In the States, when Mother Jones looks at gerrymandering, or the New York Times looks at gerrymandering, or campaign finance, those are all things that do get investigated. Do people want to read them? Do they want to sit down and spend 2 hours with it? I'm not sure, but I do think it gets covered. I don't think we cover it. I don't think we cover enough the ties between, like, the economic ties between, let's say, corporations and the political system. Those things, I completely agree, get undercovered and should be. But if there were more papers, or never mind papers, even magazines, media. Let's say just in media, journalism. Yeah, journalism. Yeah, exactly, journalism. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I am a journalist. I started at the age of 18 at the UN.
Huh?
And I've been an investigative journalist all my life.
Mm.
I do teach a free course at this school called Studies in Propaganda.
Oh, good. Is it good?
Everybody doesn't want me to quit. That's my 18th year. Some of my people who have been in my classes are here.
Yeah.
And what's really disturbing to me now is this business of launching the new Cold War and these ludicrous accusations to Putin, and then all the embassies and all this business. Yes, a second Cold War is being planned and is starting right now. And one of the reasons why they can do that is the people have proof. They do not trust their governments or any institutions that are in collusion with corporations because they have no loyalty to any country. So it's very disturbing that something like this can do a lot more. People aren't thinking now, oh, I don't believe that, there's no evidence. And there is no evidence of any of these accusations. None of them.
Okay, I don't think we can litigate the Russian thing right here.
In other words, they have big posters all over in Russia in the subway saying, blame Russia, blame Russia.
Oh.
They're making a big joke out of it.
Yeah.
But really, it will start.
Russia's only a tiny, there was a professor, Brendan Nyan at Dartmouth, who did a big study a little while ago saying that whatever influence Russians exerted over the election, it was not the decisive factor. I don't think we can discount what did go on, but psychology and various, I personally think, as I say, racism and misogyny played a much bigger role, but that's just me. Yes?
So I feel like you were sort of saying, okay, one of the factors in fake news is this profit-making month. But it seems like there's another side, which is people who are wanting to skew, powerful people who want to skew stories and put a slant on things and change the conversation.
Right.
And I'm just curious how much gets lost when we separate that, because you can have people who are powerful people who use publicists and use their money and use their influence to put out stories that are perfectly accurate, but serve as limited hangouts or that skew the conversation in some direction. I'm just curious, how much in talking about fake news are we saying, like, oh, look, there's all these people who are trying to skew the process with fake news, when it's not only people using fake news who are trying to skew the process.
Right.
Lots of other powerful
Yeah, I think this is absolutely part of it. I think if you've not read Dark Money, have you read that? Jane Mayer's book? It's about the Koch brothers. It's about how they really buy influence. And part of that influence is things like seeding the comment section of newspapers with paid people who they pay to propagate a particular, viewpoint about, for example, climate change. So I have a lot of problems with, economic influence over, corporate influence over all aspects of our lives. So I take your point. However, what I would say is that's not new, I don't think. I don't think it's really like super new. This is just the kind of the new, and this is more of a deluge and more a different face of it. But I completely take your point. I think what you're talking about has been going on forever.
You've been talking about the quality of what's out there. Do you have any comments on one of the tendencies in Europe where the European Union is talking about strengthening participatory democracy and greater engagement on the part of the citizen, the participatory citizenship and greater engagement, bringing back a kind of civics which has disappeared from here?
Yeah, well, I again, like 10 thumbs up to bringing back civics. I think it's shocking that, kids don't learn civics or about democratic processes, how things work in society. I don't know what specific program this is, though. What are they doing? Is it education or?
Well, the term that they're using is participatory citizenship.
Right.
And they're beginning to develop initiatives in that area.
Yeah. Well, and there were lots of there's great groups doing that here. There's like Samara, and there's a group called Apathy is Boring, which works at youth engagement. There's tons of groups that work. Young Women's Leadership Network, which tries to bring women from marginalized communities into the political process. So I think there's tons of that's happening, right? It just maybe doesn't get publicized as much as it should. All right.
Youth section of the Globe that young man was just talking about.
Yeah.
The new youth section that you're gonna.
Oh, yeah. Is there a new youth section?
Well, I'm just saying-
Okay, yeah. There used to be a youth section in the Star that I read all the time, and I loved it. Okay, yes?
I'm glad to hear what you said about the Golden Mail, because it's a big part of my daily information
good.
fix. One of the scariest books I read recently is by an American author, Nichols. It's called The Death of Expertise.
I read that too. I really liked that.
Well, you must be as paranoid as I am. But it gives me the impression of information now in this age having reached a state of entropy, where everybody's an expert.
Yeah.
And the purpose of information is to confirm the fact that you're an expert. So it's pretty hard for information to flow from people who actually know something to people who really need to know something.
Yeah,
Because they're no longer aware of the fact that they need to know it.
yeah,
And I think as we look at some of these campaigns, when you talk about when people talk about polarization, that's probably already there, but this now acts as a reinforcer.
Yeah.
You can work on the divisions that are already there.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to bridge.
Yeah. A less educated or less savvy populace is easier, I would argue, for sure, to manipulate. Yeah. Yes. Anybody else? Oh, yes.
Just a thought here. Have we been able to trace back the origin of those news, of some of them?
Oh, fake news? Oh, I think it's probably like on a cave wall, somebody drew like a unicorn at one point and everybody laughed at it. I think it's been going on forever. I don't actually know what it probably dates to there were the very first newspapers, which were very popular, were almost all written anonymously, right? First of all, they were all advertising, all the front pages were advertising, and then most of the stories were anonymous, and they were they were used like William Lyon Mackenzie's newspaper. They're used as political tools, right? They were propaganda, but people knew this is this propaganda, and this rag is this propaganda. And so, in a way, it was a bit clearer. And maybe we've just gotten away from being skeptical, and so now we're not skeptical, and maybe we need to be just a bit more skeptical, and that would help everybody. Okay, yes, you're asking. Okay, yep.
Yes, dear, I'm just announcing that my course starts, and it is a free course. The school, of course, asked me to do it back in 2000, Anyone interested can pick up a schedule from me, and it's only 8 lectures, and I give them on behalf of the school. First one is entitled The 11th Commandment, Thou shalt not know.
Okay, good.
Here are the schedules
Okay,
if you
thanks.
would like one.
Yes, did you have a question?
Can you speak about fake news, feminism, and politics?
Oh my God. We have to go home before next Wednesday.
I know, that was a big one, but
Oh,
if you could
God.
give a little
Oh.
tidbit.
I don't even know where to begin. I mean,
What happened with Hillary Clinton and
what happened with her? Yeah, well, I will say that when I put some of this in my book, when I was down I was at a Donald Trump rally reporting on it in October 2016, and just an astonishing number of people said an astonishing array of things to me. And not just men, a lot of women too. And it was things along the line. I had a woman tell me that she was an actual literal demon, like from hell demon, that she was a murderer, and then lots of the little old lady screamed at me, she is lies, lies. It's just sort of like, oh my God. Because I think, yes, you could criticize her on her policy. You could criticize any candidate on their policy, but there was this vitriol, this vehemence. So I think a lot of things are being about that election are now being scrutinized. The one that has not, the two things that are not, are the role that race played and the role that sexism and misogyny played. And you cannot tell me they didn't play a role. I know they did. I talked to enough people to know they did. And Rebecca Traister, the great American journalist, was just after the election. She was at a panel and somebody said, sexism didn't play a role. And she said, if there's no sexism among the voting public, why has there never been a female candidate for president? Why is it taken? Okay, so women got the vote more than 100 years ago. Let's say since then, why is there never? There's been Geraldine for vice president, and that's close as anybody got. So nobody's yet answered that question satisfactorily. And don't tell me she's a flawed candidate, because everybody's a flawed candidate. Anyway, there will be many books that I think examine this question, and I look forward to reading all of them. Okay, one more question, anybody? Okay.
What do you think will happen, if anything, with Brexit? Would there possibly be a pause?
Oh, I wish I knew. I don't think they know. I don't think there's going to be a second referendum. There has to be the vote, right? Like in the Commons. I don't know what's going to happen. It seems very fraught to me, the whole thing. And there are people who sort of follow it much more closely than I do. I'm a British citizen, so I kick myself that I didn't vote in the election. My husband did, but I didn't. Wish I had. It was like the American presidential election. I thought, there's no way. There's no way. And so I didn't bother to put my ballot in an envelope and mail it off, and he did. So didn't work, but if more of us maybe had done it, yeah. So anyway, thank you all very much for coming out. It was great to talk to you, and I really appreciate it, and I'll be here if you want to talk to me a bit more. Meta, do you want to say something?
Things I should have called your attention to. One is we have magazines here, and I forgot to show you the one that's just hot off the press. This is the first time I held one earlier today, but this is the new issue of Peace Magazine. There are 2 previous issues here, so help yourself to those. Those of you who want a certificate for attending these lectures if you sign this clipboard, those of you who've attended 6 out of the 12 this term, I will make up a certificate for you next week, and you can have it to hang on your wall if you like such things. Some people do. And I have here copies of the poster that I made for the forum that's coming up on the 30th and 31st of May. And those of you who are willing to take some with you, one or two or a dozen, or if you want 100, well, you can do that. And if you have anywhere, you can put these up so people will know about this thing. Now, next week is our last week of the series, of this particular series, and it's going to be my last series. I won't be producing these next year, and I don't think Science for Peace will do them as frequently. But what I am doing instead is I have a new thing Monday nights from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time. I have a new situation where I don't have physical audience, but I have a lot of other people because I'm live streaming a conversation. So I set up I get 3 or 4 people together. Some of them are here in Canada, some of them are in New Zealand or California. I think the next one will somebody be in Hamburg, Germany. And we will discuss a particular topic. Mostly the topics are related to this forum that we'll be holding in May. So the first lecture, well, it's not a lecture, it's a conversation. It's like a TV show. I pretend I'm Christiane Amanpour. And we have this conversation on Zoom, which is like Skype, only it's fed right into Facebook. And you can watch it live on Facebook by going to the Peace Magazine Facebook page at the time that we're from 8 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time. You can watch it and you can send in questions which I can ask other people to comment on. The first one was about nuclear weapons. No, the first one was about militarism and its effect on climate change. And there is an effect, you know, just building these weapons, even if you're not killing anybody with them, you emit a lot of CO2 in producing weapons and running them around and so on. So that was the first one, and then we had one on nuclear weapons and abolition. And this last one, last Monday, was on the effect of planting trees on climate change. That one of the really good things you can do for reducing climate change is to plant a trillion trees or more. And I hope, we're on our way in terms of doing that. And this next, well, I'd love to have you on it. The next one's going to be the effect of educating girls and giving access to family planning and to jobs for women in the workforce. The effect of these liberating things on actual global warming. And the effect is mediated by the fact that educated women and women in the workforce, especially women who have access to contraception, are more likely to have smaller families. And that's why we have less, educated women and women working are likely to reduce the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, and it's good for the planet that way. So that's the next topic. It'll be Monday on 8 to 9 p.m. on the Peace Magazine website, not Science for Peace. And I expect to keep on doing that as long as I can. I'm not good at getting around much anymore, but I still have a lot of fun at the computer if the webcam is on. So watch it if you're interested, and send your questions in and try to get people to answer it. Anyway, thank you for coming.